Welcome to 734 Games, and this is Game Time, and this is your host, Tom. Before we get started on my final thoughts on Final Fantasy VII Remake, I'm going to say my nephew, he's getting cancer treatments. His Gofundme is in the description. Please check that out. Give whatever you can. Thank you. Now let's get started with Final Fantasy VII Remake on the PlayStation 4. 7 Remake isn't a direct remake of Final Fantasy VII in the way that it's a new RPG. Although I think this is probably the direction for the new Final Fantasy games that are going to be on the mainline consoles and PC. Now, they have another Final Fantasy coming out that is actually a remake called Final Fantasy Crisis. I can't remember the exact name of it, but it's coming out in 22, and it's coming out on the mobile on iOS and Android. So it's not going to be out on the consoles, at least as far as I know. It'd be great if it came out on consoles and PC. I think that'd be pretty cool because it actually has every other installment of Final Fantasy VII because they did some spin-offs of Final Fantasy VII. And that game is going to get those spin-offs day one where all those games are going to be included, and they redid the graphics and they redid the fighting engine to where the fighting engine looks like this game but plays like the old Final Fantasy VII. So they kind of went with a more traditional take. This game is a pseudo-action game. Basically, near the end of the game, you're just going to be facing all boss battles. It's going to be boss battle after boss battle, and you're pretty much done with the open world section of this game. You don't really have an open world like you did in 7, in the original 7. And I think the game you're gonna have to wait until until at least the mobile version comes out. And if you're going to look up the Final Fantasy VII I'm talking about, the other one, it's Final Fantasy VII Ever Crisis. And it's basically Final Fantasy VII Remake, but more, like an old school remake. Basically, I mean, it is a remake, and they do pretty up the graphics, and it looks good, but it plays a lot more like a traditional RPG. And that one, I'm kind of looking forward to that. This game was a lot of fun. I enjoyed it, and the voice acting was great. Great presentation. But it is an action game, and as an action game, it's fun. But don't expect heavy RPG elements. There's some RPG elements in this game. This is an action game with RPG elements, basically, is what you have here. This is an action hack and slash. And I'm hoping that when they make the next Final Fantasy game, that they add a few more RPG elements into the game, because this one, I mean, if you want a lot more, if you want better loot and basically just more ways to enhance your character, you're not going to find too much here. Basically, you can upgrade your weapons. You obviously put the different orbs in each slot, and you get different abilities that way, different spells. But it's not like a full-on RPG, and that's pretty much all you get. And there's not, obviously, these are characters that people recognize, so they have a certain look. So you don't have a lot of gear that changes their look, but that's par for the course for Final Fantasy. The characters have a certain look, so that's not a big deal. But you really can't change your character that much throughout the game in this game as far as abilities. I mean, you have pretty basic changes. It's basically like different weapon sets. And there's other action games out there that have much deeper ways of changing your character. And as far as the world, when it is open, don't expect a super deep open world. It's a compelling open world, and it's fun, but it's not super deep. The action looks awesome. Like I said in my video, they fixed a lot of problems that they had with Final Fantasy 15 as far as the action. So this game looks and plays great, and I enjoyed it. And I mean, I think it's definitely worth it. If you have it on PSN, if you got it for free, then it's definitely worth downloading and playing, especially for free. Now, if you can find this game on sale, I mean, this game has been out for a while, so I couldn't imagine paying $50 on PSN for it when you can go out to the store and probably get it for $20. Or you can go out, you can, and I don't know, the PS5, you're probably not going to find a lot of used copies, but I probably wouldn't buy this game for $70. I mean, it's an action version of Final Fantasy Remake, but it's not quite finished. But it's still enjoyable, and I have to recommend it. I think you will enjoy it too. So that's pretty much it for this episode of Game Time. This is your host, Tom, signing off from 734 Games, where gaming is alive.